Hello, dear audience. As we promised, we are going to continue our conversations on Mother Teresa's business card. This is our number 9 conversation, and we are covering the second part of each line. Each line starts with affirmation, as Dr. Kiyaki said last time, and it continues with a request to God to help us, to strengthen us, to teach us, to guide us in whatever we need. We covered the first line, or the second half of the first line, which was the fruit of silence is prayer. Teach us to pray. In other words, yes, we know what it is. Yes, we know what we need. But in order to get to it, we need help. We need a teacher. We need somebody who is better than us. And this doesn't necessarily have to be a mere request to God. It can be a request to a friend who has better understanding of what we need, or to a spiritual father, to a spiritual mother that can teach us what to do in our spiritual journey. In Mother Teresa's case, she is approaching to God and teaching also us to do the same, to approach God with our needs. Now, the second line that we will try to cover this time during this conversation, and hopefully the rest, the fruit of prayer is faith. Now, we know that in spiritual life, faith is essential. Christ speaks about faith and says, "Blessed are those who will not see, but will believe." And he says, they will be better than you, to his disciples, saying that you seeing me, you don't have problem. You can touch me. You can see my miracles. But blessed are those who will not see, but will believe. In some sense, that's about us. And we need so much blessing to believe. And that's the why Mother Teresa approaches God with a request for help. Help us to believe. She does not say, teach us to believe. That's not an instruction problem. That's a help problem. We need strength. We need help. We need somebody to remind us, be present maybe next to us, have some jokes with us. Sometimes we say in our conversation that God has good sense of humor. Presbyter, thank you for being with our audience and part of this wonderful conversation that Mother Teresa has started. We're going to talk about help us to believe. Now, we know that this comes from Peter's words, maybe. Maybe she wanted to repeat the same words. What else could she say greater than that? If the greatest apostle said that, she probably wanted to just be next to him.
Well, if Peter said, "I believe, Lord, help my unbelief," and as we've said before in these discussions, that the Greek word for belief, pistis, is also the same Greek word for the word trust, pistis. And so if we, as we would say in the past, look at St. Peter's words of, "I believe, Lord, help my unbelief," and substitute it with the word trust and say, "I trust you, Lord, help my mistrust," it takes on another depth of meaning, a nuance that helps us understand or get a better feel for the importance of the word pistis, which is the Greek word that's used in the Bible for belief. And so if you are saying that Mother Teresa most likely might have had, at least to some degree, this in her mind, if St. Peter said, "Help my unbelief," how much more is that true for us? "I trust you, Lord, help my mistrust." And when we think about her life, I wonder how often she prayed that prayer. "Help me, Lord, help me trust you more." Because what she was doing by human understanding was the impossible. Trying to change a culture, and still trying to do that from heaven through her prayers, number one, and number two, those brothers and sisters who are committed to the ministry she founded in treating people with dignity they deserve as created in the image and likeness of God, our brothers and sisters, so that they will be treated with the kindness at the end of their life or in times of trouble that human beings should be treated with, in a culture that did not value people who were at the end of life in that way, especially if they were people from the lowest classes. And so I wonder how often she prayed that prayer.
In what ways would God help someone to believe? I have heard this expression from many people that during a conversation with an atheist or unbeliever, they would say, "Do you believe in God?" And the response will be obviously no. And the person who believed would say, well, you don't believe in God, but God believes in you. And that, in some cases that I have heard, has become a starting point for the person to start believing, because they realize that it's not up to them. They can say anything, but God is ultimately in control of things. And so helping us to believe, in some respect, it's when we start asking for help. But in other respects, it can also be when we don't even know that help is there. How is God helping us?
I look at the next line of this prayer, and maybe that is a little bit of a response to your question, because the next line of the petition side of the prayer goes from what we were just reflecting on now, help us to believe, and it goes next to guide us to love. And I think, however we make ourselves flexible or open, even a tiny bit, to the possibility of God's love in our life. It doesn't have to be much. It just has to be a little bit of a softening, a little bit of an openness. And sometimes we can be more open and not even realize we're doing that. Because there are many accounts in Christian history where people have been ambushed by God unexpectedly. And there must have been something in them that was a little bit open that they didn't even realize was happening, so that God would enjoy himself to ambush that person with love. Now remember, God always takes the first step. So even if sometimes it feels like we are reaching out to God, it's always in response to the God of love who reached out to each one of us first. Guide us to love. This petition of her prayer requires trust, requires opening ourselves, requires a kind of letting go that often makes us feel uncomfortable. As you said earlier, we are not in charge. We are not in command. We are accountable, so there is this nuance of using the best of ourselves, our intellect, our choice for the good, for truth, in sort of turning ourselves in that right direction. But we don't know what's going to happen once we turn in that right direction. There's an old expression in the 12-step world, do the right thing and let go of the consequences. And in a sense, that's really let go and let God. I mean, it's sort of the flip side of let go and let God. And in a sense, these words echo within the framework of this petition of the prayer. Guide us to love. If we are being helped to believe, if God is helping us to trust him, then it can't help but lead us to love, to experiencing the love of God and somehow having that flood out of us toward those around us.
And can we also say that God's help for us to believe in him is the love that he has for us? Every moment, if we are careful, we can see that there's a big chance we go to bed at night and we will not wake up in the morning. But every time we wake up, it's kind of another miracle. And it's a reason to give thanks. Like we said last time, give thanks for those broccolis. Give thanks for waking up in the morning. Or there was a hurricane. We all hope that it won't hit our house.
Well, you're making my heart ache as you talk about this, because now my eyes are falling to the next line, which says, strengthen us to serve. And so, but I see that now as two things. We should be grateful for the damage that didn't come, as opposed to only having to deal with the damage that did come with the bad weather, for example. The next line, strengthen us to serve. Let me just start with the first two words, strengthen us. When we have to deal with these changes in our schedule, changes in our regular pace of life, when bad things happen, when catastrophes happen, we have to ask God for strength and the wisdom to respond in a way that's appropriate to the situation. And we won't know till that happens, as an expression of love, to pray for the strength to go on. So then, as part of that, we can serve.
One of the things that Christ says about the end times, he says, if the times were not shortened, nobody would be able to bear it. That's another way of love that wants everybody to be able to bear it, or to get to the final destination, not be lost on the way.
We're all in relationship. And that is an indicator that even though we've talked in the past about the providence of God, that everything is within the palm of God's hand, all of history is somehow leading us back to God, while at the same time human freedom is respected absolutely. How does that happen? We've said in the past together, technically, philosophically, logically, those do not make sense. They can't be true at the same time. Logically, they can't be true at the same time. That's definitely accepted. As Christians, we would say both are true at the same time in a way we don't understand. And so while we are trusting that we are all still in the palm of God's hand within God's providence, we are being led to places that He has had in mind for us.
I want to create a contrast between believing, between faith, and between knowledge. Because many people criticize Christianity for just believing in things, not knowing anything, because we don't really know anything. But we believe in great things. And in some sense, the criticism is that it's a blind or childlike or childish faith that we have, and we trust in it so much, and we think that we're going to be saved, we're going to be this, we're going to be that. And on the contrary, they have knowledge. They know what's what.
The day before my wedding day, I remember running around the house. I grew up in the Boston area, in the town of Brookline. And I remember I was crazed. I don't know what I was doing, but I was trying to get ready. I was trying to get things. I had a few hours to myself in my family home in Brookline. I don't know where my parents were. I don't know where my siblings were. I don't know where my husband was. And I was just running around getting ready. And the doorbell rings. And it was 2 Jehovah Witnesses, Greek-speaking Jehovah Witnesses, coming to witness to me the day before my wedding, as I'm running around trying to get ready. So I opened the door, and they're speaking Greek to me, and they're telling me about what it means to be part of the Watchtower Society. And I said, I'll talk to you if you tell me why you left the Christian church. Tell me your life. They left. They've got the answers. They've got it all figured out. Well, Christianity really must have made a bad impression on them. What have we done as Christians? What kind of impression are we giving to others so they come to those conclusions? And where is it valid? And how many of us are nominal Christians? And how many of us, is it sort of a childish in a negative naive way, like it's formulaic? And I just have to do this, 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 and this, and this, and I've got it all figured out. Kind of like that Pharisee that we talked about in the previous episode, who had it all figured out. He had his little clipboard of what he needed to do to be a good Jewish leader. Check, 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 check. Thank you, Lord, that you didn't make me like him. And so that's not prayer, and that's not a good example. And so I wonder how many times over and over again have we Christians given those bad examples. At the same time, what kind of knowledge is that? It's knowledge in the end that is self-determined, that is self-reliant. And yes, we need the self. God gave us a brain. God gave us a heart. God gave us a mind, senses to perceive things. So we're supposed to use these. But there's knowledge that is self-reliant knowledge, and then there's knowledge that is based in experience beyond the self. Now, in Greek, the word for knowledge is gnosis, and unfortunately, most of the time when people talk about knowledge, especially in the West, especially in Anglophone countries, we're talking about academic knowledge, or maybe street smarts is the kind of knowledge that comes that way, but it's a kind of smarts. It's a kind of facts or information that is stored, maybe a whole lot of information, historical data and experiences that are stored as a way to be recalled, either to perform in academia or to perform in a work situation or some kind of rote kind of way. I would call that more of a two-dimensional understanding of the word knowledge that is, by and large, the way most Western Anglophone persons understand it. The Greek word for knowledge, gnosis, which is what the scriptures talk about, includes all that. But it is always experience. It is always embodied. It is always lived from, let's say, the inside out. And so this kind of gnosis needs the mind, it needs everything I mentioned earlier, but it is a being knowledge. It is existential. It is experiential. It is grounded. This kind of knowledge is very different than abstract, when they poo-poo Christianity and they go into their own direction where they worship lesser gods on my planet.
When we say, help us to believe, or fruit of prayer is faith, many times I hear or I see people who believe in their own way, and I have to accept it, because it's not me, it's them, it's their way, it's their understanding, and I'm not their judge to say whether they're right or wrong. But is there something that we shouldn't believe in? Or is there something that we should believe to be sure, or to know that we are believing in the right thing? For example, this morning I received a text message from my friend. He says, "Can you send me the Nicene Creed?" What I started thinking about it, it says what we are, what we should be, what should we believe, what should we do. And sometimes people criticize even the Nicene Council and the creed itself, or the decisions of the councils, saying that this dogmatism. Is it important to know exactly what we are believing in? We believe in one God. That's the first sentence of the creed. Is that important? Is it important to know that this one God is Trinity? Is it important to know the relationship between them? Because people say, well, I believe and I'm a good person. I do good things. What's my mistake? What's my problem? What is your problem with me? Why do you say that you have to see what the church is leading us to? Or we have to be doing things with the church or with the church fathers, how they teach?
I'm going to respond with something you taught me, and that is that Metropolitan Anthony Bloom would say, which is to become a gospel. And that's just for all of us, to become a gospel and to trust the gospel, trust the good news. God is a good God, a phrase that we say over and over again in the liturgies of the church. God is a good and benevolent God who loves humankind. We say that over and over again. He's not a dirty-minded master that's out to get us, and out to find and pick us apart for all our little character defects, because we've got plenty, me first. This question that you're sharing makes me feel anxious, because that means I've got to be kind of on guard to have the right answer for everybody, and I can't have the right answer for everybody all the time. I'm not clairvoyant. I don't have that gift yet. Maybe I don't think I will, but who knows? God's got a sense of humor. But even if I had that gift, to have it with the kind of love God wants me to implement, that kind of a gift that reflects His love, that's even a taller order, and that's up to His humor too, for all of us. So by trusting the words that Metropolitan Anthony Bloom said, become a gospel, means we just have to grow and become the people God has called us to be as Christians, growing in what that means a day at a time. And then as we encounter people we love, to have questions, we don't have to hold ourselves hostage to have all the right answers. What we need to do is, A, love the other person and respond as authentically, as gently as possible, in a way that's not enabling or insulting ourselves. By becoming a gospel, by becoming more yourself, by loving that person, God knows that person's heart. And I can only imagine how many times people have come to me asking questions, and I think I understand what they're saying, and I totally misconstrue it, and I give them a great answer. I wonder how many thousands of times I've done that. And I know that God knows my heart, and I know God knows their hearts. And so God's mercy is there. And who knows what good could have been exchanged anyway, even if I misunderstood them. Maybe it was just to see them and treat them with love. That might have been promoting more the gospel of love and God's love for that other person by treating them with the respect they need at that moment than anything I could have said with my words.
How important is it to be clear about what you believe in?
Clear with ourselves, clear with God. Do I know what it means to worship a Trinity? No. I can talk about what the church has been teaching. At the same time, what does that mean on a deeper level? That's hubris for me to know that and to say I know that, because that would be saying I know how God works in His inner workings. And to say that would mean I'm equal to God. No, I can't do that. As I started to say a few minutes ago, God knows our hearts. And it's so strange sometimes trusting that, because otherwise, I don't know about you, but sometimes those of us that enjoy using our left brain, which is a gift, I can get caught in this feedback loop in my head where I'm asking questions to the point where the question itself dissolves. And I don't even know what I believe anymore. And so, but maybe sometimes even that's a gift. When I get to that place where I can't figure out pi, like the mathematical pi, that, oh, okay, the pi belongs to God. Then give it to God and go on with my life that moment in the presence of God. It's not the issue of being right. It's the issue of being open and loving, always facing the truth, capital T, author of truth Himself. So strengthen us to serve, as she says. It's not only to give us the energy, but to help us get our bearings so that we're serving in the right direction, we're facing in the right direction. She's not praying, for example, tell us what to do. Strengthen us so we have the energy, the capacity, and the ability to look in the right direction and to proceed with free will. Why? Because God respects free will absolutely and works with it.
We see Christ criticizing people who are praying and saying, this is not the way to pray. This is how you have to pray. In some respects, prayer and service are similar. Some people pray through their service. Some people serve by praying. Can someone serve and in the same time be like those Pharisees that were praying, obviously, on the surface, but in reality they were criticized?
You bring up a good point, but I'm going to turn it from another angle because there's something that we haven't talked about, and that is a lot of the monastic literature will talk about the difference between service and prayer. And I would say 60, 70, 80% of the time, you will find definitely the weight being on prayer is always more important. Why? Because it helps us build our relationship with God from the inside out. So doing serves being. So prayer is a way of being. It's an effort. It's not just doing nothing. It's a disciplined effort of engaging in loving relationship with the other, capital O other, God. And through the centuries, the monastic literature has always been that comes first. And as one does that, the opportunity to serve, reaching out to others will present itself. For some people, it might be rather rarely, but it still presents itself. You know, I think there are some Orthodox snobs out there that kind of think, well, I'm a person called to prayer, acting like that will never present itself, and say, no, God's going to present those times to you. How, when, where, it's none of my business, but that does happen. And other stories in the monastic literature will show that there are people who moved more into the service area of what we would call ministry today, but founded in prayer. A lot like Mother Teresa, but you'll find Orthodox examples also of people that have acted in this way as well.
An example from a documentary that I watched a few days ago. This is about the first African-American saint, I think recognized by Catholic Church already, or a person who is at least recognized as a holy person like Mother Teresa. She lived in the southern states of United States, and this was before the revolution. Very faithful person, started from very young age getting involved with the church, helping the priest, and started school for the children of the slaves, and that was forbidden by the law. The church did not have problem with it, but the law was forbidding. At the time, you probably know better than me and audience know better, that even the marriage between African Americans and the white people were forbidden. So there were all kinds of nuances in the documentary, but there were two things that are related to our conversation today and took my attention. One was that after a while, she started serving poor people. At one point, her service developed so much that the priest talked to the cardinal and made arrangements that she will be recognized as a servant of God and be in the church. And one of the steps was that she either has to get married, which in this case she was in love with a white person and the person was from France. She could have got married because the French law allowed the marriage. And the other choice was that she even refuses that and becomes a nun. And finally she decided that she's going to become a nun. Now she had a service. She was doing her service in the community without even thinking if she wants to become a nun or not. That's her call, that's from her heart, and she did it. And now it had to be made official and put in order, so she became a nun with her friend. And now they show her, she's scrubbing the floors. That's the first step in the monastery. When the novice comes in, they have to start scrubbing the floors. And there is somebody who is in charge of them, and she goes around and makes fun of them and says, well, after this, you don't have to rest, you have to go to the kitchen and do that. And she's a spirited person. She starts talking back, and that makes the situation even worse. At one point, when this person who is in charge left, saying that she's going to come back in 5 minutes, wants to see everything is done, and they're going to go to the next, the abbess comes down, and she sees them and says, oh, my children, you are doing a wonderful job. And she takes one of the rugs and starts cleaning the floor herself. And they say, well, why are you doing this? This is going to put us in huge trouble. Now they come see you with us. And she turns and says, well, Christ washed the feet of his disciples. This is nothing to compare to that. I have to do this too. And then the person who was in charge is coming back fast to punish them more, and she freezes when she says the abbess doing the same thing that they are doing, and she doesn't speak. She takes another rug and joins them. After some kind of disease spreads in town, and the priest is alone, doesn't know how to take care of sick people. The hospitals are full, now they're bringing people to the church. And at one point, it was only a few days that he has sent these two girls to the monastery. He stands and says, there is no other way, just go and get them out of there and bring them back. They belong here. So they come back and they start taking care of, because they knew what they were doing. There was a doctor that they were working with, they had learned a lot of things. And the service continues. They don't go back to the monastery anymore. It's a contrast of where people belong. In the first place, they belonged here. They were taking care of the people that were serving them. And then they were put in a monastery and they were scrubbing floors. That's okay too, but that's not where they belonged.
But we don't know how they were enriched by that time in the monastery and by that story that you shared, for example, of the abbess coming and also joining them. And I don't know, that fourth person, the bully supervisor nun, when you said that she also helped clean the floors after that, was it because she felt she had to, or do you think she had a repentance and her heart melted and it was a turnaround for her? You were watching the program, I wasn't. What was your impression?
I think what she felt at the moment is that she thought that she was doing the right thing, because that's actually the right thing. Mm-hmm. That's what she was told to do, to stretch their humility, to see how far can they go. She was doing the right thing. I don't think she was doing because she had a bad heart, but then in her own way, doing the right thing made her wrong. And then she realized that that's not the only way to help someone.
Beautiful.
To learn humility. There is a better way, and that's what the abbess chose to.
So I wonder, that experience, however long she was in the monastery, if she had these kinds of experiences, how that enriched her as a human being, how that enriched her as a Christian, how that enriched her as a person being able to reach out, conveying the love of God to others when she was called out again. I bet she was different. I bet she was better. I bet she was more present.
Well, she got an answer also for her question whether she would get married or not, because it was coming back over and over when she was in the monastery that maybe she didn't make the right decision. Maybe she should have gotten married. And then she went to the chapel to pray. She found the abbess there. And then they talked, and the abbess started talking about her own doubts that always come. She said it's normal. They are always going to come. Even if you get married, you will have doubts about other things. You have to consider that. If I'm here, I'm an abbess, it doesn't mean that I have reached the top and I don't have any problems in my personal life anymore. She said, I always remember my parents. I always remember the village that I grew up, and I want to go back. She had the answer to her questions when she went out. Actually, the person who she was going to marry had left, knowing that she's not marrying him, and he came back too, in that critical situation where they needed a doctor, and he was the doctor who was helping them. They both realized that where their life belongs. And he said in France, where he served as a doctor, people could hire God to heal them. Ironically, that's what he said, even hire God, so they don't need him. And then he realized that this is where he belongs, with the poor people who don't have anything, who cannot hire anybody. Thinking about this, to bring this example, I again remembered the story of Father Arseny. There is another episode in the book where they bring this person who has frozen feet, and he can barely feel himself. He can see what's going on around. And when they put him on a bed, he heard and saw that somebody is untying his shoes. And he thought, oh my goodness, now my feet are frozen, somebody's stealing my shoes, and I cannot even move. What am I going to do when I wake up in the morning? And he doesn't remember after that. And then he says that I woke up. And I woke up, he says, I can feel my toes. That's unlikely. When you have frozen feet, you most likely won't feel your toes. And then he said he stood up and he saw his boots next to his bed. They were dried, cleaned. And then he he turned around and he saw this old man sitting next to him and giving him hot water to drink and get better. And there was nobody in the building because Father Arseny was staying there to clean the barracks. And from the beginning, you see how much they make fun of him, they beat him. But through his service, things like this, small things, he gains their heart. And even the criminals at the end start respecting him. Many of them turn to God, and many of them survive the camp and get out of there. This kind of service is beautiful, and that's what makes me think about putting that service in the right place.
What you're talking about is the final line of the petitions, lead us to peace. Because if peace is a person, and if we find that we are where we belong, then we have found peace.
So if we reach peace, then that's the indicator whether or not we have gone the right way.
We are where we are supposed to be. It's all a mystery. And the Greek word for mystery is mysterion, and it's the same word we use to describe the sacraments. We often use the word mystery, but it's all a mystery. You know, who we are, each one of us as unique human persons created in the image and likeness of God, are unrepeatable. And only God knows what our truest vocation is and who we are in our fullest identity. That's in His heart and mind. And we've said in the past that as we grow, God turns us into the persons He wants us to become. That's why it's hard work for us to do our share, in a sense like we are the clay, and we have to make ourselves as supple as possible, facing the right direction, so the potter can turn us into what He has in mind to become. And so we might be one way 1 minute, and then 5 minutes later, whoops, we're way different, never to be the same again, hopefully for the better. And sometimes things happen that at least for a long time, it doesn't look like the better. And at the same time, God can still keep fashioning us despite those huge changes. But it's hard remaining supple, and it's hard facing the right direction and not being distracted to have God do that work through the course of our life. So the paradox is we're living our life. We're going to work. We're making decisions. We are reaching out to help people as we are able. We are praying through the day as we are able peacefully. We are stretching ourselves peacefully. We are resting as often as is healthy for us so that we can be sustained and replenished to go on. The paradox is we become the persons He calls us to be. We wind up being where we belong, and we just have to keep showing up for our lives to have that happen.
Well, I have mentioned about this earlier. The fruit of service is peace, and I did not know about the second half of it, and it was a question for me. How can service lead to peace? If somebody serves, and serves constantly, in case of a Christian person or a nun or a monk or priest, service is a continuous thing. It's not like I serve today and I'm done. Unceasingly, like a prayer, doesn't have an end. How can it lead to peace?
Because remember 2 or 3 episodes ago I told you about this woman that came and shared with me a very intimate story of her confession about feeling like she's climbed this not mountain but mountain range. And as she's in confession, after she's climbed mountain after mountain after mountain, she's exhausted to the point where she looks back, she can't even go home because all she sees is mountains. She doesn't see any vegetation, she's climbed so high. She doesn't see the green grass of her homeland or the pastures of the meadows where she grew up. And so she knows, she feels, she's telling this to her spiritual father, that I don't think I can climb much more. I'm afraid that I'm going to climb a little bit more, and then I will collapse from exhaustion, not be able to move a centimeter more, and then from exhaustion even forget why I'm there, and from there die. And the spiritual father is saying back to her, sounds like you're doing it about right. And this is the mountain of God. This is the mountain of God working through our lives at times when we don't even quite know if we're doing the right thing. But this is the direction that seemed most logical, best, or at least all the other options were a no-go. So you go this direction. There's a kind of listening that's demanded of that kind of work. And so service without listening, without deep listening in the presence of God, to fine-tune it, to double-check on the direction, is dangerous if we don't do that, because we might wind up after a while to be on the wrong mountain. At least with this person sharing her story with her spiritual director, He was telling her, you are on the right mountain. This is what it looks like. He didn't say you're on the wrong mountain.
I have been there.
Right. Yeah, very good. Yeah, he's been there. This is your place. Okay. And so that deep listening, which is implied between the lines here of the prayer, is something that we are accountable for.
Besides the fact that peace is a person, that the peace is our Lord Jesus Christ himself, how else do you understand peace?
Seeing that we just experienced over the weekend Hurricane Irene. And in Greek, the word Irene means peace. And I've been praying and crossing my fingers and praying that Irene would be gentle, because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I love the name Irene because it means peace and tranquility. There's a kind of tranquility that's also implied with the word peace, Irene in Greek. God's love is always expressed from a foundation of peace and tranquility in a way we don't understand. God's love is joyful. I think peace and joy, at least from the perspective of God, is coming from the same source, the same thing. How we experience it in our human lives. And I think when you said earlier, it's when you discover that you are where you belong, where you are where you're supposed to be. And when that resonates with God's loving will for us, that's when we experience a kind of peace. Even if things are tumultuous around us, there's a kind of quiet tranquility that occurs by us resting there.
Thank you very much. Let our Lord lead us to peace, teach us how to pray so we can be in peace. In some sense, I think prayer is very important for the feeling of peace.
I sense a deep love for Mother Teresa from you. And I'm wondering, for an Orthodox who's taken the risk of creating 8 or 9 episodes dedicated to her work, to her prayer, to her love, how this happened.
Now, there are a few saints that are very important for me. Francis of Assisi is one of them. Seraphim of Sarov. Mother Teresa is not a saint yet, but it doesn't matter. Sergei of Radonezh. When I have come to relate to their works or to their prayers or to their life story, I just felt a relationship.
How do you think you're a different person as a result of being touched by her?
Her example and the others that I mentioned, just watching a documentary about her kind of aligns me in where I have to be. If I am discouraged or unhappy or angry, watching that cuts everything off, aligns me with God. Everything else is not necessary. Just being in the presence of that person, it's like that Russian apologist says, as if you were invited to the palace to have a dinner with the king. You wouldn't remember anything, what's going on back in your life, with your job, anything. You have one concentration, is the king. You're sitting next to him and eating with him. And if you thought about something else, you will be missing out. And that's what happens to me when I relate to these few saints.
This has been very powerful for me and very helpful for me. Thank you, Arkady.
Thank you. Have a good day, dear audience, and we'll see you next time.